There is a scene from the year 2000 where Lisa Simpson stands in the Oval Office and mentions inheriting a budget crunch from President Trump. It aired 16 years before Trump won the presidency. Most people treat moments like that as a party trick, a fun coincidence, something to post online with a surprised face emoji. But when you line up 10 of these moments, one after another, and look at what they actually describe, the coincidence explanation stops working. What you are left with is something harder to dismiss. A show that was not guessing about the future. A show that was reading the present so clearly and so carefully that the future was just a natural extension of what it could already see. This is every time The Simpsons was right about America. Not the fake ones, not the digitally altered screenshots, the real ones, with episode numbers and writer statements and documented real-world events sitting right next to them. Welcome to Yellow Fan. Let us get into it. The Celebrity President. There is a scene from the year 2000 that stopped being funny the moment Donald Trump won the presidency. Lisa Simpson is standing in the Oval Office. She has just become President of the United States. Her cabinet is gathered around her, waiting, and Lisa looks at them and says, matter-of-factly, that they have inherited quite a budget crunch from President Trump. That line aired on March 19th, 2000. 16 years before Donald Trump came down an escalator and announced he was running for president. 16 years before anyone thought it was actually going to happen. The episode is called Bart to the Future. It is the 17th episode of season 11. The basic setup is simple. Bart gets a vision of his future at a Native American casino, and in that future, his sister Lisa has become the first female president of the United States. The Trump line is not the main joke of the episode. It is a throwaway moment, a single sentence buried in a larger scene. The writers put it there and moved on. And that is exactly what makes it so unsettling. When the clip resurfaced after Trump won in 2016, the internet treated it like a magic trick, like the writers had somehow seen the future. News channels played it. Social media went crazy. Everyone wanted to know how they had done it. The answer is not magic, and it is not a coincidence either. Dan Greeny, the writer who put that line in the script, explained it clearly when journalists came calling in 2016. He said it seemed like the logical last stop before America hit bottom. He said it was intended as a warning. Trump was not a random name they pulled from nowhere. In October of 1999, just a few months before this episode was written, Donald Trump had actually launched what is called a Presidential Exploratory Committee. He was seriously considering running for president as a member of the Reform Party. The writers knew that. They were paying attention to the news the way good satirists always do. They took what was already happening, cranked it up, and wrote it into a joke about the future. The joke was that a famous, wealthy celebrity with no political experience would one day run the country and leave behind a financial disaster. That was the punchline. The punchline became real life. But here is the thing that people missed when they were sharing the clip and calling it a prediction. The reason this line worked in 2000, the reason the writers thought it was funny at all, is because something about America was already true by then. The country had spent decades turning celebrities into authority figures. If you were famous enough, if people knew your name and your face well enough, that recognition started to feel like it meant something. Like fame was a qualification. Like being on television was a form of credibility. The Simpsons writers did not predict the future. They looked at what America was already doing and followed it to its natural conclusion. Greeny said the line was meant as a warning to America. Nobody heard the warning because it was delivered as a joke, and jokes are easy to dismiss. Now look at what else is in that scene. Lisa is wearing a purple pantsuit. She has her pearl necklace, which she always wears. She is standing in the Oval Office, looking professional and serious. When Kamala Harris stood on the steps of the Capitol on January 20th, 2021, the day of President Biden's inauguration, she was wearing a purple pantsuit and pearls. Photos of Lisa from the episode and photos of Harris from that day went viral together, side by side. People could not believe how similar the two images looked. Mike Scully, a longtime writer for the show, was asked about this in an interview with The Hollywood Reporter. He said the purple color was probably just a random choice made by the animators. He said the pearls were not a prediction because Lisa always wears pearls. miles. That is her character. There was no crystal ball involved. And yet, there the two images are, sitting next to each other, looking like one was traced from the other. This is the part that matters, though. The part that is easy to miss when you are focused on the visual match. The reason Lisa is dressed that way in the episode is because the writers wanted her to look presidential. They wanted her to project authority and intelligence. They dressed her in the kind of outfit that signals power to an American audience. And when a real woman stood in that position 21 years later, she wore something that signals the same thing, because those signals are baked into the culture. The Simpsons did not predict Harris's outfit. They understood how America performs power, and they dressed Lisa accordingly, and Harris dressed herself accordingly, and both choices came from the same cultural logic. The episode aired on the Fox network on March 19, 2000. It was written by Dan Greeny and directed by Michael Marcantel. The Trump line was not the central point of the episode. It was not even close to the central point. The episode is really about Bart, about his future, about whether he will ever amount to anything. Lisa's presidency is background detail. The budget crunch from President Trump is a single sentence meant to establish how bad things have gotten in this fictional America. That sentence took 16 years to stop being fictional. Now here is something worth sitting with. When Trump actually won in 2016, the show acknowledged it. The chalkboard gag in season 28's episode called Havana Wild Weekend, which aired after the election, read, "Being right sucks." 3 words, no explanation. The show knew exactly what it had done. The writers understood that being correct about something like that is not a victory. It is a small, quiet horror. So what was the show actually saying in that scene from 2000? What was the real argument underneath the joke? America had been building towards something for a long time. The relationship between celebrity and credibility in this country is not a recent development. It has roots that go back decades. Ronald Reagan was a movie actor before he became governor of California and then president. Arnold Schwarzenegger, one of the most famous action movie stars in the world, became governor of California in 2003. Jesse Ventura, a professional wrestler, became governor of Minnesota in 1999, the same year the Bart to the Future episode was being written. The line between entertainment and political authority was not a line that Americans were very good at holding. The Simpsons understood this. The show had been watching American culture for over a decade by the time Greeny wrote that script. It had seen how the country treated fame. It had seen how celebrity worked. And it understood that a country willing to elect wrestlers and movie stars to high office had already accepted the basic premise that made a Trump presidency possible. The name in the script was Trump because Trump was already flirting with the idea publicly, and because he was exactly the kind of figure that made the joke land. But the joke would have worked with any sufficiently famous, sufficiently wealthy, sufficiently outrageous celebrity. The name was the punchline. The idea was the warning. Greeny was not the only one who saw it this way. After Trump won, other writers and producers from the show spoke about the episode in similar terms. They were not celebrating being right. They were uncomfortable about it. There is a difference between satire that exaggerates reality to expose something true and satire that turns out to have been straight reporting. By 2016, the Bart to the Future episode had crossed that line. And here is one more layer that almost never gets discussed when people talk about this episode. The scene where Lisa inherits the budget crunch from Trump is not just a joke about Trump. It is a joke about what comes after. It is a joke about consequences. The president who created the mess is gone. Someone else has to clean it up. The chaos is inherited. That structure, that specific shape of American political reality, where one administration creates problems that fall onto the next, is not a punchline that needed updating. It has been the recurring pattern of American governance for as long as most people can remember. The writers did not just predict a name, they predicted a cycle. The episode holds up not because the writers were psychic. It holds up because they were looking at something real. They were watching a country that had already decided entertainment was authority, and they followed that logic forward to its conclusion. And they wrote it down, and then they moved on to the next episode. 22 years after the episode aired, the chalkboard in Havana Wild Weekend still says it best. Being right sucks. That is not a celebration. That is a confession. The show knew what it was doing when it put Trump's name in that script. It was not predicting, it was warning. And the warning came in the form of a cartoon joke, because that was the only way to say something that true without people turning the channel. The writers looked at America in 1999, saw what was already there, and described where it was going. The audience laughed and forgot about it. That gap between what the show could see and what the audience was willing to absorb is the gap this entire essay lives in. Because the Trump line is not even close to the darkest thing The Simpsons got right about America. It is not the most accurate. It is not the most disturbing. It is just the most famous. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is a character who appeared in a single episode in 1997 who cuts closer to the bone than any fictional president ever could. A man who worked his entire life, did everything right, followed every rule, and was destroyed by a country that rewarded none of it. His name was Frank Grimes, and the episode he appears in is the most honest thing American television has ever said about what the American dream actually costs the people who believe in it. Section 2. The Unqualified Everyman and the Myth of the Populist Politician. There is a moment near the beginning of Trash of the Titans where a room full of corporate executives sits around a boardroom table studying sales charts. They are not politicians. They are not community leaders. They are businessmen looking at numbers and figuring out how to squeeze more money out of ordinary people. That scene lasts about 30 seconds, and the episode moves on like it barely happened. It is the most important 30 seconds in the episode, because everything that follows, Homer running for office, Homer winning, Homer destroying the town, every bit of it flows directly out of that opening. The people who manufactured Love Day, the fake holiday that generated all the trash that started the whole mess, they are never held responsible. They are never mentioned again. The town is buried in garbage, and a man named Homer Simpson is blamed for it, and the executives are back in their boardroom making the next chart. Trash of the Titans is the 22nd episode of Season 9. It aired on April 26, 1998. It was the 200th episode of the entire series, which is why the production team wanted it to be something special. Writer Ian Maxtone Graham has confirmed in interviews that he based the central idea of Homer running for sanitation commissioner on a real experience a friend of his had navigating Chicago politics through the sanitation department. He wanted the episode to be about trash. He wanted it to be about Springfield as a community. The result is one of the most precise pieces of political satire the show ever produced, dressed up as a silly story about garbage. The episode won the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program in 1998. It is not remembered as a prestige episode. It is remembered as the one where Homer runs for Garbage Man. That gap between what the episode is doing and how people remember it is part of the point. Here is what actually happens. Homer misses the garbage truck. He shouts insults at the workers. His garbage service gets cut off. Marge writes an apology letter and signs Homer's name without telling him. Homer finds out, feels his dignity has been violated, and storms down to City Hall to get his apology letter back. There he meets Ray Patterson, the incumbent sanitation commissioner, voiced by Steve Martin. Patterson is calm, reasonable, experienced, and genuinely good at his job. He gives Homer the letter back without a fight. He tries to be civil. Homer, furious that Patterson is being civil, decides to run against him for commissioner. That is the setup. A man challenges a qualified public servant not because he has a better plan, not because the service is broken, not because he cares about the community, but because his pride was hurt and he cannot let it go. He is not running to fix anything. He is running because running feels like winning. His first attempt at campaigning fails completely. He interrupts a U2 concert being held in Springfield, grabs the microphone, and tries to pitch himself to the crowd. He gets beaten up by security. The crowd boos. Bono watches from the stage with polite confusion. Then Homer finds his message. Moe, sitting at the bar, gives him the slogan that changes everything. Can't someone else do it? 4 words. That is the entire campaign. No policy, no plan, no explanation of how anything will actually be better. Just a promise that the hard parts of life will be handled by someone else. That the inconveniences and the responsibilities will disappear. That voting for Homer means never having to think about trash again. The town goes wild. Homer wins in a landslide. This is the part of the episode that hits differently now than it did in 1998. The show does not spend much time explaining why people vote for Homer. It does not need to. It just shows them responding to the slogan. The crowd cheers. The vote happens. Homer wins. The episode trusts the audience to understand why a man with no qualifications, no plan, and no relevant experience just beat a 25-year veteran of public service. It trusts the audience because the answer is obvious. Homer told people what they wanted to hear. Patterson told people the truth. And in an election, that is rarely a fair fight. Patterson says it himself at the debate. He tells the crowd directly, if you want an experienced public servant, vote for me. But if you want to believe in promises about round-the-clock trash pickup and garbage men washing your car and cleaning your gutters, then vote for this lunatic. The crowd cheers for the lunatic. That line was written in 1997. It has not aged a single day. Now Homer is commissioner. And here is where the episode shifts from being a satire about elections to being a satire about governance. Homer's first move is to promise his workers everything. Round-the-clock service, celebrity appearances, luxury perks. He hires famous people to ride on the garbage trucks. He gives the workers everything they ask for and then some. He does this because it feels good, because saying yes is easier than saying no, because a man who won an election by promising things has no instinct for the moment when promises have to stop. Mayor Quimby calls Homer into his office and tells him he has spent the entire yearly budget of the sanitation department in 1 month. 1 month. Homer's response is not to cut spending. His response is to find a workaround. He contacts cities all across the United States and offers to take their garbage, storing it in an abandoned mine shaft on the outskirts of Springfield in exchange for money. He is not solving the problem. He is hiding it underground and charging people to help him hide it. The garbage builds up under Springfield. It starts erupting from the ground. The whole town is destroyed. Every resident has to leave. The town has to be physically moved 5 miles away, and the original Springfield is left buried under a mountain of trash. Ray Patterson is brought back to clean it up. His entrance is set to the theme from Sanford and Son. He walks to the podium, looks out at the crowd, and delivers one of the greatest lines in the history of the show. Oh gosh, I am not much on speeches, but it is so gratifying to leave you wallowing in the mess you have made. You are screwed. Thank you. Bye. Then he walks off to the same music. That is the ending of the episode. There is no redemption for Homer. There is no lesson learned. The town made its choice, it paid the price, and the qualified person who could have prevented all of it gets to watch the consequences from a safe distance. The show does not moralize. It does not lecture. It just shows what happens when a community decides that liking someone is more important than trusting them to do a job. Now step back and look at what this episode is actually describing. It is describing a system, not a single election, not a single bad politician, a system in which the mechanics of getting elected and the mechanics of governing are completely disconnected from each other. Homer's skills as a candidate, his charm, his relatability, his willingness to promise anything, are exactly the things that make him a disaster as an administrator. The qualities that won him the job are the qualities that destroyed the town. The show understood in 1998 what political scientists have spent decades trying to explain in academic papers. There is also something happening in the background of this episode that barely gets mentioned when people talk about it: the Love Day scene at the beginning. Executives in a boardroom inventing a holiday to boost sales. The Simpsons fall for it completely. Homer shouts at Lisa not to ruin it. By the end of the episode, the town is buried in the packaging from Love Day. The garbage that started everything, the garbage that led Homer to miss the truck, that led to the confrontation, that led to the candidacy, that led to the disaster, it all came from a holiday that was manufactured in a corporate boardroom to generate revenue. The executives are never seen again after that opening scene. The ordinary people of Springfield are the ones who get buried. This is not an accident. The writers put that scene at the beginning of the 200th episode of the series deliberately. They wanted the episode about trash and politics to start with the image of businessmen inventing problems for other people to deal with and profit from. Everything Homer does wrong flows from a decision made in that boardroom, but Homer is the one who gets fired. That structure is not a comment on one particular story. It is a comment on how the whole system works. Now here is the factual piece that most people do not know about this episode. When the city of Toronto was debating a real proposal to dump the city's garbage into an abandoned mine in northern Ontario, two members of city council, Jack Layton and Olivia Chow, actually screened Trash of the Titans for their fellow council members as part of the argument against the proposal. A cartoon episode from 1998 was used as a legitimate piece of evidence in a real political debate because its depiction of exactly that scenario was so accurate and so complete that nothing else made the point as well. The proposal was eventually rejected. Ray Patterson's closing speech, the one about wallowing in the mess you have made, was written as a punchline. It turned out to be a fairly accurate description of how American communities tend to feel in the years after they vote for someone who told them what they wanted to hear. Homer's campaign slogan, "Can't someone else do it?" is the most honest summary of a certain strain of American political desire ever put into a cartoon. The fantasy that someone else will handle the hard stuff, that competence is less important than personality, that the man who makes you laugh and promises the moon is a better choice than the man who quietly does the job well. That fantasy did not begin in Springfield, and it did not end there either. The episode holds the Emmy. It holds the record for being the 200th episode of the longest-running animated series in American television history. It holds a scene where an entire town gets buried in its own garbage because it elected someone who told it what it wanted to hear. And it holds that boardroom opening, which most people have forgotten about, where the problem was created by people who are never made to answer for it. That detail does not resolve. The episode does not go back to the executives. It does not name them or punish them or even acknowledge them after the first scene. They existed, they created the conditions for everything that followed, and then they disappeared back into their building while everyone else dealt with the consequences. If that sounds familiar, it is because it is. The Simpsons was not describing something that might happen. It was describing something that had already been happening in American communities for decades. The names and the locations change, the garbage stays. But if Trash of the Titans describes what happens when voters choose charm over competence in an election, it still leaves one question sitting quietly underneath everything. What happens to the person who did everything right? Who worked hard, followed the rules, earned every single thing they have, and then had to stand next to Homer Simpson and watch the world reward him for doing nothing. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That person has a name, and his story is darker than any failed election, any buried town, any campaign slogan. Because Frank Grimes did not lose a vote. He lost something that cannot be won back. Section 3. The American Dream is a lie, and we always knew. Frank Grimes has a degree in nuclear physics. He earned it by studying through the mail, in his spare time, while working 2 jobs. After spending years recovering from a silo explosion that nearly killed him on his 18th birthday. After being abandoned by his family at age 4 and spending his childhood working as a delivery boy, carrying gifts to other people's children while having nothing himself. By the time Frank Grimes walks into the Springfield nuclear power plant, he has done everything the American dream told him to do. He worked harder than everyone around him. He educated himself when no one helped him. He survived things that would have finished most people. He showed up every single day. He earned his place. And then he met Homer Simpson. Homer's Enemy is the 23rd episode of Season 8. It aired on May 4th, 1997. It was written by John Swartzwelder, based on an idea from executive producer Bill Oakley. The director was Jim Reardon. Frank Grimes was voiced by Hank Azaria, who was originally just filling in at the table read while the production team looked for a guest star to take the role. His performance at that table read was so precise, so completely realized, that nobody was ever hired to replace him. Hank Azaria played Grimes from beginning to end. The episode opens with a television news report about Frank Grimes. Kent Brockman narrates the story of a man who, through sheer determination, has pulled himself out of poverty and hardship and built a life through hard work alone. Mr. Burns sees the report, is moved by it, and decides to hire Grimes at the plant as a show of goodwill. He initially plans to give Grimes an important position. By the time Grimes arrives, Burns has already forgotten about the plan and assigns him to Sector 7G, right next to Homer Simpson. What follows is one of the most carefully constructed episodes the show ever made. The whole point of Frank Grimes as a character is that he is the first person in the history of Springfield who responds to Homer the way a real person would. Every other character in the show has adapted to Homer. They have learned to work around him, forgive him, ignore him, or simply accept the strange reality of a world where Homer Simpson exists and thrives. Frank Grimes has not had time to adapt. He sees Homer clearly, possibly for the first time anyone ever has, and what he sees makes no sense to him. Homer is a safety inspector at a nuclear power plant. He has been responsible for 316 near disasters at the facility, a number Lenny mentions casually, the way you would mention someone's coffee order. He sleeps in his radiation suit. He stores radioactive materials carelessly. He drinks at lunch. He operates heavy machinery without paying attention. He is spectacularly, almost impressively bad at the job he is supposed to be doing. And he owns a house, a big one. He has a car, 2 cars. He has a beautiful wife who loves him. He has been to space. He has met presidents. He has had adventures that most people could not buy their way into. He has a son who, in the episode subplot, buys a factory for $1 and immediately owns it. Grimes watches all of this and cannot process it, not because he is bitter by nature. He is bitter because what he is seeing should not be possible. The system he has believed in his entire life, the system that told him hard work leads to reward and effort leads to success, is standing in front of him in the form of Homer Simpson and proving itself a lie. His famous speech to Homer happens after Homer invites him to dinner, and Grimes sees the house for the first time. He stands in the living room and looks around at everything Homer has, and he breaks. He tells Homer that he has had to work hard every day of his life, and has a briefcase and a haircut to show for it. He tells Homer that he is what is wrong with America, that Homer coasts through life, does as little as possible, and leeches off decent, hard-working people. That if Homer lived in any other country in the world, he would have starved to death long ago. He calls Homer a fraud, a total fraud. Bart looks at his father and says, "He has got you there, Dad." Even Homer's own son cannot argue with the assessment. Now here is the thing about that speech that matters. Grimes is correct. Everything he says about Homer's life is factually accurate within the world of the show. Homer is unqualified for his job. Homer's success is not earned in any traditional sense. Homer's life is a collection of things he did not work for and does not deserve by any conventional measurement. Grimes is not wrong about any of it. The show does not let him survive being right. At the episode's climax, Grimes finally breaks completely. He runs through the plant, declaring that he is going to act like Homer Simpson. He eats without manners. He does not wash his hands. He spins in Homer's chair. He shouts that he is Homer Simpson and grabs what he thinks are safety gloves off a wall. The label on the wall clearly reads "Extremely High Voltage." Grimes ignores it. He grabs the cables. He is electrocuted and killed instantly. The next scene is his funeral. Homer falls asleep during the service and starts talking in his sleep, asking someone to change the channel. The whole crowd laughs. The episode ends. No redemption, no lesson, no acknowledgement that anything has gone wrong. The crowd at Frank Grimes' funeral is laughing at Homer, not mourning Grimes. The show does not flinch from this. It plays the ending exactly as dark as it sounds. John Swartzwelder, who wrote the episode, listed it among his favorite episodes he ever wrote. Bill Oakley said in interviews that the show took sadistic pleasure in Grimes' downfall, partly because Grimes was so righteous. That righteousness, that complete refusal to accept the world as it was, is what the episode treats as the fatal flaw. Not Homer's incompetence, not the broken system. Grimes' inability to adapt to the reality in front of him. The episode holds the highest user rating of any Simpsons episode on IMDb as of 2025. It sits at 9.3 out of 10 based on over 7,700 votes. Ricky Gervais, the creator of The Office, has called it the most complete episode of television. The AV Club, Vanity Fair, The Guardian, Time, and Screen Rant have all ranked it among the best episodes the show ever made. Matt Groening himself ranked it as his 6th favorite episode of the entire series in a 2000 Entertainment Weekly piece. And yet, most people who love this episode describe it as mean and funny. They laugh at Grimes' increasing frustration the way the Springfield crowd laughs at Homer in the funeral scene, which is exactly what the show intended, and exactly what makes it so hard to sit with once you understand what it is actually doing. Because Homer's Enemy is not a comedy about an unlucky man who cannot handle Homer Simpson. It is a document about what America does to people who believe in its promises. Frank Grimes believed the deal. Work hard, educate yourself, persevere. The reward will come. He held up his end of the arrangement for his entire life. He did not complain. He did not cut corners. He did not ask for help. He just kept working and believing that the work would eventually mean something. The show's answer to that belief is Homer Simpson existing and thriving, and Grimes dying while trying to imitate him, and the crowd laughing at the funeral. That is not an accident. The writers made every one of those choices deliberately. Executive producer Bill Oakley confirmed the episode was built around a specific question. What would happen if a realistic person entered the world of the show? What would a real person see if they looked at Homer's life without the protective layer of cartoon logic that everyone else in Springfield has absorbed? The answer is that a real person would see the lie, and the lie would kill them. In 2017, a professor named Greg Scharzer published a peer-reviewed academic paper specifically about this episode. The paper is called Frank Grimes' Enemy: Precarious Labor and Realism in The Simpsons, and it was published in the journal Television and New Media. Scharzer argues that Frank Grimes represents the moment when the show's portrayal of American work life shifted from something stable and recognizable to something broken and unstable. He writes that the show's early seasons depicted Homer as a man struggling within a system that basically worked. A blue-collar job, a house, a family, modest comfort. It was not glamorous, but it was real. Grimes arrives in Season 8, and his presence makes it impossible to keep pretending that Homer's life is achievable for someone like Grimes, because it is not, and everyone in the room knows it. The paper uses academic language to describe something the episode communicates in 22 minutes of cartoon television. The American working class deal, the one that promised stable employment and modest comfort in exchange for hard work and loyalty, was already coming apart by 1997. Frank Grimes is a man who signed up for that deal without being told the terms had changed. There is one more piece of the episode that almost never gets discussed. When Grimes first arrives at the plant, Mr. Burns watches his news story and is genuinely moved. He calls Grimes an admirable, self-made man. He wants to reward that kind of determination. By the time Grimes gets to the building, Burns has lost interest and gives him a low-level job with a desk barely big enough to use. When Grimes accidentally knocks over a beaker of acid while saving Homer from drinking it, Burns blames Grimes for the damage, cuts his pay, and issues him a formal warning. Grimes saved Homer's life. He was punished for it. The system that was supposed to reward Frank Grimes is the same system that punishes him for doing the right thing and rewards Homer for doing nothing. The episode does not make a speech about this. It just shows it happening, twice, in the background, and lets the viewer connect the dots. When the show aired in 1997, the United States was in the middle of an economic boom. Unemployment was low. The stock market was climbing. The 90s were supposed to be the proof that the American system worked. Frank Grimes arrived in the middle of all that prosperity, and the show looked right at him and said, "The prosperity is not for people like you," and it never was. And everyone laughing at Homer's funeral already knew that. That is the part that does not let go. Not the death, not the dark ending, the crowd laughing. Because the crowd knows Homer. They like Homer. Homer is one of them. And Frank Grimes, with his briefcase and his mail-order degree and his complete inability to find the funny side of a broken promise, is not one of them. He never was. The show understood that the people most hurt by a rigged system are often the people most committed to believing the system is fair, because giving up that belief means giving up everything they built their lives on. Grimes could not give it up. The belief killed him faster than the voltage did. The episode ends with Homer asleep and the crowd laughing. 28 years later, that ending has not stopped being true. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But if Homer's Enemy is the show at its most honest about what hard work actually earns in America, there is a different kind of truth waiting in another episode. One that is not about individuals at all. One that is about the institution that is supposed to protect everyone, the government itself, and whether it is actually watching or whether it is doing something else entirely with all that attention. Section 4. Government Mass Surveillance. Before anyone admitted it. There is a scene in the Simpsons movie where Marge is trying to calm Lisa down. The family is on the run. They have escaped from Springfield, which has been sealed under a giant glass dome by the Environmental Protection Agency. They are hiding, moving through public spaces, trying not to be found. Lisa is worried that the government is tracking them. She is nervous and alert and convinced that someone is listening. Marge tells her to relax. She says, and this is her exact line from the film, "It is not like the government is listening to everybody's conversations." The camera then cuts away from Marge's face. It pulls back. It keeps pulling back until it is no longer showing the Simpson family at all. It is showing the inside of a massive government building, the National Security Agency. There are hundreds of workers sitting at desks in front of computer screens and monitoring equipment. Every single one of them is listening to private conversations happening across the country. The room is enormous. The operation is vast. And one of the workers, after sitting through what must be years of boring phone calls, suddenly hears Marge say those words and lights up with excitement because they have finally caught something useful. The audience laughed. It was a good joke, a quick, well-timed gag about paranoid government overreach that played as absurd precisely because the idea of the government actually doing something like that on that scale seemed ridiculous. The Simpsons movie was released on July 27, 2007. On June 5, 2013, a former government contractor named Edward Snowden contacted journalists at the Guardian newspaper and began sharing documents. Those documents revealed that the National Security Agency of the United States government had been running a program that collected and stored the phone records of hundreds of millions of ordinary American citizens, not suspected criminals, not people under investigation, ordinary people going about their lives, making calls, sending messages, living normally, while the government recorded the details of those communications in bulk. The scale of what Snowden revealed was almost exactly what the movie had depicted 6 years earlier. A vast operation, hundreds of workers, private conversations being monitored across the country, the whole infrastructure of mass surveillance that Marge dismissed as a paranoid fantasy while standing unknowingly inside it. Snowden's leaks became one of the biggest news stories of the decade. They sparked debates about privacy, about government power, about what citizens were owed in terms of honesty from the people running the country. They led to legal challenges and congressional hearings and international incidents. They changed how people thought about their phones and their emails and their internet searches. And in a movie theater 6 years before any of that happened, a cartoon showed the whole thing as a punchline. This one requires a little more careful handling than some of the other things the show got right, because the writers were not working from nothing. There were already stories circulating in 2007 about government surveillance programs. The New York Times had published a report in December 2005, 2 years before the movie came out, revealing that the NSA was conducting surveillance on American citizens without the proper legal approval. That story had created controversy at the time. The writers of the Simpsons movie were aware that something like this was happening. The joke in the film was not a guess pulled from thin air. It was an exaggeration of something that journalists had already begun reporting on. But here is what makes it significant. The joke worked in 2007 because the idea of the government doing it at the scale depicted in the film still seemed absurd to most people. A room with hundreds of workers, listening to everybody? That felt like the kind of paranoid overstatement that cartoons traffic in. When Snowden's documents came out in 2013, the actual scale of the real program was so much larger than most people had imagined that the movie's depiction, which had seemed like an exaggeration, turned out to be conservative. The show had not predicted surveillance. It had predicted the specific way in which Americans would be surprised by surveillance. It had predicted that when the truth came out, the truth would be bigger and more organized and more comprehensive than anyone had let themselves believe. Marge's line is the key. It is not like the government is listening to everybody's conversations. She says this while standing in the middle of proof that the government is doing exactly that. She is not stupid. She is not naive in a simple way. She is doing what most Americans were doing in 2007. She was choosing not to believe something uncomfortable because believing it would require her to change how she understood the world she was living in. The camera pulls back to show the audience what Marge cannot see. That is the whole joke. And it is also the whole truth. The audience is laughing at Marge for not knowing something they are only learning about in the same moment she dismisses it. By 2013, the audience had become Marge. They had been standing in the middle of something they refused to see, and it took someone going to a newspaper with a stack of documents to make the pullback happen in real life. Now here is a detail about the movie's production that most people do not know. The filmmakers at Gracie Films and the writers worked on the Simpsons movie for years. It was released in 2007, but had been in development for much longer. The script went through multiple drafts. The NSA scene was not a late addition inserted after the 2005 Time story broke. It was part of a broader story about government overreach and environmental negligence that the writers had been building around for the entire film. The movie's main plot involves the government literally sealing an entire American town under a dome because it is easier to contain the problem than solve it. The NSA scene is one piece of a larger argument the film is making about what happens when government power operates without real oversight or accountability. The dome over Springfield is the more dramatic version of the same idea. The government decides that a polluted lake is too inconvenient to address properly, so it covers the whole thing up and isolates the community. Nobody inside the dome voted for this. Nobody was consulted. The decision was made by a man named Russ Cargill, the head of the EPA, who presents the president with a list of options and then tells him to pick one without reading them. The president picks number 3 because it has a good ring to it. An entire town is sealed under glass because a president picked a number without reading the consequences. That detail, a major government decision made by a distracted leader who cannot be bothered with the specifics, sits right next to the NSA scene in the same film. The two jokes are making the same point from different angles. One is about surveillance, one is about negligence. Both are about a government that is either watching you too closely or not paying attention at all. And either way, the ordinary person loses. The Simpsons had been making versions of this argument since its earliest seasons. Mayor Quimby, Springfield's perpetually corrupt mayor, who is an obvious parody of the Kennedy political family, exists in almost every episode as a reminder that the people running things are primarily interested in running things for themselves. He takes bribes, he misuses public funds, he makes decisions based on what benefits him rather than what benefits the town. He is not a villain in the dramatic sense. He is just a man in charge who has learned that being in charge is personally profitable and sees no reason to change that. The NSA scene in the movie is a version of this, but scaled up from local corruption to national policy. It is not about one crooked mayor pocketing money. It is about an entire institution operating in secret, doing something to every citizen in the country with nobody's knowledge or consent. What makes the scene land the way it does is the normalcy of it. The workers in the NSA building are not sinister. They are not dressed in black or lurking in shadows. They are sitting at desks, eating lunch and getting bored and getting excited when something interesting finally comes through. They look like office workers. They look like people doing a regular job. The horror of the scene is not that there are monsters watching everyone. The horror is that there are ordinary people watching everyone. anyone, and it is just a job to them, and the whole operation is so large and so routine that it has stopped feeling unusual to anyone inside it. That is a more accurate portrait of how these things actually work than most serious dramatic films about government surveillance have managed to produce. The Snowden documents did not reveal a secret society of villains. They revealed a bureaucracy, an enormous, well-funded, carefully organized bureaucracy doing something that most of its workers probably thought of as their regular job. The movie showed that in 2007, with a sight gag, in under 30 seconds. There is also a version of this scene earlier in the show's run that gets less attention. In various episodes across the series, the government's relationship with Springfield's citizens is shown as one of selective visibility. The government notices the town when it wants something from it. It ignores the town when it is convenient. It surveils and it neglects in turns. And the citizens of Springfield are never quite sure which version of government attention they are living under on any given day. That uncertainty is something Americans lived with before 2013 and have lived with even more consciously since. The question of whether you are being watched, by whom, for what purpose, and with what legal basis is not a question that was invented by the Snowden leaks. It is a question that American law and American politics have been wrestling with for as long as surveillance technology has existed. The Simpsons movie put the question in its sharpest possible form and wrapped it in a joke so that people could laugh instead of panic. 6 years later, the panic was available anyway. Edward Snowden's name became known around the world in June 2013. He left the United States and eventually settled in Russia, where he remained as of the time this essay was written. The legal and political arguments about what he did, whether it was heroic or criminal or both, have continued ever since. The surveillance programs he revealed were real. The documents were verified. The debate they started is ongoing. The Simpsons movie made $536 million at the worldwide box office. It remains the only theatrical Simpsons film released as of 2026. The NSA scene is about 45 seconds long. It was written as a joke about government paranoia and turned out to be a factual description of government operations. Marge said it was not like the government was listening to everybody's conversations. She was wrong. The show knew she was wrong when they wrote the line. They just could not prove it yet. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But if the government watching its own citizens in secret is one version of broken trust, there is something even more quietly devastating waiting in the next section. Because it is one thing for a government to watch you without telling you, it is something else entirely when an entire economy invents a reason to take your money, gets you to celebrate while it does it, and then lets you pick up the bill for the mess it made. Section 5. Legalized Gambling as Economic Desperation. The episode begins with a memory. Old Springfield, the 1940s. The streets are clean, the buildings are proud, people are walking around with purpose. There is a sense that the town is alive and working and going somewhere. Then the screen dissolves and the camera shows Springfield as it actually is in 1993. Crumbling storefronts, empty lots, buildings that look like they gave up somewhere around 1967 and never found a reason to try again. The whole first act of the episode is constructed to show the audience how badly the town has failed before anyone proposes a solution. That opening was a deliberate creative choice. Writer Bill Oakley confirmed in interviews that one of the main goals of the episode was to show how genuinely dismal Springfield had become. He wanted the audience to understand why people in the town would say yes to something they might otherwise say no to. He wanted the desperation to be visible before the casino ever opened. The episode is called $$ Pringfield, with the S replaced by a $. Its full title is $$ Pringfield Springfield, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Legalized Gambling. It is the 10th episode of Season 5. It aired on December 16th, 1993. It was written by Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein and directed by Wes Archer. In its original broadcast, it was watched by 11 million households and was the highest-rated show on the Fox network that week. Oakley has said in interviews that the episode was directly inspired by a newspaper article he and Weinstein found about a town in Mississippi that was introducing riverboat gambling as a way to save its economy. That detail matters. The writers were not imagining a hypothetical. They were watching something that was already beginning to happen in real American communities, and they wrote an episode about where it would lead. In 1993, legal commercial gambling in the United States existed in only a handful of states. Nevada had always had it. Atlantic City had opened its casinos in the late 1970s. A small number of other states had begun permitting various forms of gambling in the years leading up to the episode. By the time Springfield aired, the conversation about expanding gambling as a way to fix struggling local economies was very much happening in real American cities and state capitals. By 2023, 38 states had legalized commercial gambling in some form. The episode did not predict that number, but it described exactly the logic that produced it, and it described exactly what that logic costs the people it is supposed to help. Here is what happens in the episode. Mayor Quimby calls a town meeting because Springfield's economy is in trouble. Various citizens stand up and offer suggestions. Then, Principal Skinner proposes legalized gambling. The crowd immediately gets excited. Skinner tries to add that some of the revenue could go to the town's underfunded public schools. The crowd goes completely silent. Then he mentions the gambling part again, and the crowd erupts. That 8-second sequence is doing something very specific. It is showing that the appeal of the casino has nothing to do with the school funding argument. The schools are struggling. Everyone knows the schools are struggling. But the promise of fixing the schools through gambling revenue is not what gets the room on its feet. The gambling itself is what gets the room on its feet. The school funding is an afterthought that nobody actually cares about. It is the justification, not the motivation. Then Ned Flanders turns to Reverend Lovejoy and asks whether gambling is morally acceptable. Lovejoy says, "Once something has been approved by the government, it is no longer immoral." The crowd cheers. And then Mr. Burns says quietly to himself, "By building a casino, I could tighten my stranglehold on this dismal town." The crowd cheers again. They are cheering a different thing than Burns is saying, but they are cheering at the same moment. The show does not underline this. It does not slow down to make sure the audience caught it. It just lets it happen and keeps moving, trusting the viewer to notice that the people celebrating the gambling solution and the man planning to exploit them for it are sharing the same moment of satisfaction. Mr. Burns builds the casino. Homer gets a job as a blackjack dealer. The casino opens, and Marge, who had initially shown no interest in gambling, finds a quarter on the floor near a slot machine, drops it in, and wins. She is addicted by the next scene. This is the part of the episode that the show takes the most seriously. Every other plot in the episode, Homer at the blackjack table, Bart opening his treehouse casino, Mr. Burns becoming a paranoid recluse inside the building he created, all of it is played for laughs. Marge's gambling addiction is not. The show lets it be genuinely damaging. She stops coming home. She neglects the children. Lisa cannot get help with a school project. Maggie is briefly left unsupervised near dangerous animals. The family falls apart in practical, specific ways because Marge cannot stop sitting at the slot machine. The show understood something in 1993 that took public health researchers years to document with data. Slot machines are not like other forms of gambling. They are designed in a specific way that makes them more addictive than almost any other form of gambling available to ordinary people. The speed of the game, the near-miss effect where the machine shows 2 out of 3 matching symbols and almost feels like a win, the lights and sounds that celebrate even tiny payouts. All of these things work together to keep a person sitting at the machine long past the point where any rational calculation would say to stop. Marge is not weak. She is not a problem person who was always going to struggle with this. She finds a quarter on the floor, puts it in, wins, and the machine does the rest. The episode aired 12 years before the American Psychiatric Association began the process of formally recognizing gambling disorder as a condition comparable to substance addiction. The science caught up to what the cartoon showed in 1993. There is also the Smithers moment. At one point, a security guard from the casino approaches Marge at the slot machines. He tells her that they are required by law to ask every 75 hours whether she thinks she has gambled enough. She says no. He tells her they will get her another free drink and walks away. 75 hours. 3 full days of sitting at a slot machine before anyone is legally obligated to check in. And when they do check in, the check-in is a formality. The free drink is not. The drink is the casino's actual response to a person who has been gambling for 3 days straight. That joke is not an exaggeration of real casino policy. It is a description of it. Casinos in the United States have historically been permitted to allow people to gamble for extended periods without intervention. The free drinks that casinos provide to gamblers are not hospitality. They are a business strategy. Alcohol reduces the judgment that might cause a person to leave. The casino's legal obligation to ask if someone has gambled enough is not designed to stop gambling. It is designed to exist on paper. The show knew this in 1993. It put it in a throwaway joke that most people remember as funny without registering what it is actually describing. Then there is Mr. Burns. Burns builds the casino because he wants money and power. Once it opens and starts generating enormous profit, something unexpected happens to him. He becomes terrified of germs. He stops leaving the building. He grows his fingernails out. He starts wearing tissue boxes as shoes. He builds an elaborate model airplane that he is obsessed with. He gives his employees odd instructions from behind closed doors. He becomes, in other words, a direct parody of Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes was one of the wealthiest men in America in the mid-20th century. He was also a casino owner in Las Vegas. In his later years, he became severely troubled, isolating himself from the world, obsessing over contamination, surrounding himself with a small group of assistants, and communicating with the outside world through written notes and intermediaries. The parallels between Burns's behavior in the episode and Hughes's documented real behavior are not subtle. They are deliberate and specific. What the show is doing with this parody is connecting the casino industry to its own history. The men who built American gambling culture, the men who turned Las Vegas from a small desert city into one of the most visited places in the country, were not ordinary business people running a clean industry. They were figures like Hughes, enormous concentrations of wealth and eccentricity operating in an environment with very little oversight. Burns becoming Hughes inside his own casino is the show's way of saying that the casino industry and the kind of person who builds it are not separable things. You get one and you get the other. By the end of the episode, the casino has not solved Springfield's problems. The economic desperation that opened the episode is still there. The schools are still underfunded. The town is still struggling. The casino has added a new problem, Marge's addiction, to the existing ones without fixing any of them. Homer eventually confronts Marge about her gambling, and she acknowledges she needs to do better. The family is reunited. Everything returns to normal. But the casino is still there. The show does not close it down. The episode ends without addressing whether Springfield is actually better off than it was before the gambling arrived. That absence is intentional. The show is not saying gambling destroyed Springfield. It is saying gambling promised something and delivered something different. And the difference is the part nobody talked about in the town meeting. Skinner's school funding argument got silence. The gambling got cheers. The schools are still underfunded at the end of the episode. They are still underfunded in every subsequent episode the show ever aired. The National Council on Problem Gambling in the United States has documented that rates of gambling addiction and problem gambling increase in direct proportion to the expansion of legal gambling access. More states permitting gambling means more people with gambling problems. This is not a controversial finding. It is a consistent result that has been observed across decades of data collection. The casino does not bring in new money from outside the community in sufficient quantities to replace the money it removes from people who cannot stop gambling. The revenue goes to the state and the owner. The cost is paid by the people sitting at the slot machines. Marge finds a quarter on the floor. The machine does the rest. That is the whole story. The episode told it in 1993. The data confirmed it in the decades that followed. 38 states have now made the same decision Springfield made at that town meeting, and the arguments used to justify those decisions have not changed much from the ones Principal Skinner made while the crowd waited impatiently to hear the word gambling again. The episode was watched by 11 million households. It won no major awards. It is remembered fondly as the one with the Howard Hughes parody and the boogeyman scene and Robert Goulet singing at Bart's Treehouse Casino. The part about Marge and the slot machine and the 75-hour policy check is the part that turned out to be a document. But gambling is at least an honest transaction in one sense. You know you are risking something. You can see the machine. You can see the odds, even if they are displayed in a way designed to confuse you. What happens when the transaction is invisible? When the thing being sold to you is a holiday, a reason to buy things, a feeling manufactured in a boardroom and delivered to your doorstep, wrapped in sentiment that was invented last Tuesday. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That question has an answer. The show gave it in the same episode where Homer ran for garbage commissioner, in 30 seconds of boardroom footage that most people have completely forgotten about. And it turns out that manufactured desire, the kind that comes with a calendar date and a marketing budget, is one of the oldest and most reliable tricks America has ever pulled on itself. Section 6. The billionaire running for office to avoid accountability. The fish has 3 eyes. That is where the episode starts. Bart and Lisa are fishing in the river that runs near Mr. Burns's nuclear power plant. They pull something out of the water and it has 3 eyes, one in the center of its forehead, 2 where eyes are supposed to be. They name it Blinky. A photographer happens to be nearby. The photo ends up on the front page of the newspaper. State inspectors arrive at the plant. They find dozens of serious safety violations. They tell Mr. Burns that if he does not fix every single one of them, the plant will be shut down permanently. The cost of fixing the violations is more than Burns wants to pay, so he decides to run for governor instead. That is the entire setup of 2 cars in every garage and 3 eyes on every fish. It is the 4th episode of season 2, though it was the first episode produced in production order for that season. It aired on November 1st, 1990. It was written by Sam Simon and John Swartzwelder and directed by Wes Archer. The title is a reference to a slogan used in Herbert Hoover's 1928 presidential campaign, a promise of prosperity that arrived just before the Great Depression. That reference is not accidental. The writers knew what they were doing when they reached back to Hoover. They were connecting Burns's campaign to a long tradition of American political promises that sound good and deliver badly. Hoover promised 2 cars and a chicken. Burns promises lower taxes and a 3-eyed fish that is actually an evolutionary miracle. The structure is the same. The gap between the promise and the reality is the same. Only the specific lie has been updated. The episode is set in Season 2, which means the show is barely a year old when it produces what the Washington Post's Tom Shales called, in his original review, a bullseye piece of political satire. The Miami Herald's Hal Budeker said the episode had the wit of the best episodes of All in the Family. Ken Tucker at Entertainment Weekly called it masterful. The show was 12 episodes old when these reviews came in. It had already figured out something about American politics that most dramas spend entire seasons trying to approach. Here is what it figured out. When Burns's advisors tell him he has a problem, they do not tell him he needs to fix the plant. They do not tell him he needs to address the safety violations. They do not suggest he clean up the river or stop producing 3-eyed fish. None of that is on the table. The problem they identify is a public relations problem. The public currently rates Burns as despicable or worse at a rate of 98%. That is the number they give him. 98% of voters find him despicable. The advisors have assembled a team to fix this. Not a team to fix the plant, a team to fix the number. The team consists of a speechwriter, a joke writer, a spin doctor, a makeup artist, and a personal trainer. Their job is not to make Burns better at governing or more qualified for public office. Their job is to turn one image of Burns into a different image of Burns. They show him 2 pictures, one of how he actually looks, hunched and cold, and one of an artist's conception of how he could look, upright and smiling. Burns stares at the second picture and asks why his teeth are showing like that. The advisor tells him it is because he is smiling. Burns says, "Excellent. This is exactly the kind of trickery I am paying you for." Trickery. Burns uses the word himself. He is not confused about what his campaign is. He is not under any illusion that he is a good candidate or a good person or someone the public should trust with their state's government. He knows he is despicable. He has decided that the solution is to make people believe otherwise long enough to win an election, after which the regulations that threatened his plant will no longer apply to him because he will be the one setting the regulations. The episode aired in 1990. The basic mechanism it describes, a wealthy and powerful person running for office specifically to remove the legal accountability that threatens their business interests, has appeared in American politics so many times since then that it has essentially become a recognized pattern. What makes the episode's treatment of this so precise is that it does not present Burns as uniquely evil. It presents him as logical. Given his circumstances, given the fact that fixing the violations would cost him money and that running for governor would cost him less and also solve the underlying problem, the decision to run is the rational one. The episode is not saying Burns is a monster for doing this. It is saying the system allows it. It is saying there is nothing in place to stop a man from buying his way into public office specifically to avoid following rules that apply to everyone else. The show saw this as a structural feature of American politics, not an aberration. The campaign itself is rendered in specific, accurate detail. Burns's first move after engaging his team is to address the 3-eyed fish directly. He cannot make the fish go away. The photos are already out. So instead, he goes on television with an actor playing Charles Darwin and has that actor explain that Blinky is not a genetic mutation caused by nuclear nuclear contamination, Blinky is an evolutionary leap forward, Mother Nature producing something new and remarkable. The third eye is a gift, not a symptom. It works. The poles move. Burns goes from despicable to competitive in a matter of days because he hired someone to stand next to a man in a costume and say words that were not true in a way that sounded reasonable. Then he runs a smear campaign against the incumbent governor, Mary Bailey. The episode does not spend much time on this. It just shows it happening. Bailey is, by every measure in the episode, a good governor. She is beloved. She has a record of actual service. Her response to Burns's smear campaign is to say she prefers to rely on voters' intelligence and good judgment. A reporter looks at her and says, "Interesting strategy. Good luck." That exchange is 4 seconds long, and it is one of the most quietly devastating things the show ever put on screen. The person running an honest campaign based on her actual record is treated as the eccentric one for trusting voters to respond to facts. The person running a campaign built entirely on manufactured image and deliberate dishonesty is treated as the competitive one. The show does not editorialize, it just shows the reporter's face. Homer is supporting Burns during all of this, not because he believes in Burns, he says it plainly to Marge. He is voting for his boss because he does not want to get fired. He is afraid. His support for Burns is entirely coerced, and the show does not pretend otherwise. Homer wears a Burns button and immediately stabs himself with the pin because he is putting it on while distracted. He agrees to let Burns use the family home as a campaign prop for a televised dinner because Burns asked him to, and Homer lacks the courage to say no. Marge, meanwhile, is going door to door for Mary Bailey. She is the only person in the episode who is supporting someone she actually believes in for reasons that have nothing to do with fear or self-interest. She is also the person who ultimately destroys Burns's campaign, not through any organized effort, but through a single act of refusing to pretend. The night before the election, Burns comes to the Simpson house for a televised dinner. His campaign team has scripted the whole thing. They have given the family prepared questions to ask. Lisa is supposed to ask something flattering that Burns has a prepared answer for. The cameras are rolling. Burns is performing the role of a regular guy having dinner with a regular family. Everything is controlled and artificial and going according to plan. Then Marge serves Blinky. She puts the three-eyed fish on Burns's plate, right in front of the cameras. Burns has spent the entire campaign telling the public that Blinky is not dangerous, that the fish is an evolutionary miracle, that there is nothing wrong with what his plant produced. Now he has to eat it, on television, with reporters in the room. He has to put Blinky in his mouth and chew and swallow and smile, because if he cannot eat the fish, then everything his campaign said about the fish was a lie, and everyone in the room will know it, and the cameras will have recorded the moment he flinched. He cannot do it. He chews once and spits the fish out. It flies through the air and lands on the floor. Cameras flash. The piece of fish sitting on the Simpson family floor becomes the image that ends Burns's political career. His campaign team picks up their things and leaves. The polls collapse. Mary Bailey wins the election. Burns stands in the Simpson living room and says, "This anonymous clan of slack-jawed troglodytes has cost me the election. And yet, if I were to have them killed, I would be the one to go to jail. That is democracy for you. That is democracy for you." Burns says it as a complaint. The show means it as something else. The episode is called 2 Cars in Every Garage and 3 Eyes on Every Fish. And the three-eyed fish is what defeats the man who produced it. The thing he did wrong is the thing that destroys him, not because the system caught him, not because investigators found evidence, because Marge Simpson put his own product on his plate and pointed a camera at his face. The episode was made in 1990. Every element of what it depicts, the wealthy person running to avoid regulation, the hired image team, the manufactured persona, the smear campaign against a qualified opponent, the moment of truth that cuts through the performance, all of it has played out in American politics so many times in the decades since that the episode reads less like satire and more like a field guide. What the show understood in Season 2 that took American political coverage much longer to articulate clearly is that the separation between a candidate's public image and their private interests is not a bug in the system, it is a feature. The system permits it. The machinery of a campaign, the advisors and the spin doctors and the speechwriters, exists specifically to manage that separation and keep it from closing. Burns is not unusual. He is just honest with his team about what he is doing, which is the one thing actual politicians in this situation are careful never to be. The fish is still in the river when the episode ends. The plant is still operating. The violations that started the whole story have not been fixed. Burns lost the election, but he did not lose the plant. The regulatory problem that sent him into politics in the first place is still there. The episode ends with Burns threatening Homer and Marge reassuring her husband that his dreams are too small for anyone to destroy. The fish keeps swimming in its contaminated river with its 3 eyes, and nobody is coming to fix it. That fish has been in American waterways for a long time, not always with 3 eyes, but always as proof that something upstream went wrong and someone with enough money decided it was cheaper to manage the story than clean up the water. But if a rich man buying political access to escape accountability is one kind of American story, there is a simpler and in some ways more depressing version of the same impulse. The one that does not require a campaign or a spin doctor or a television dinner with a scripted family. The one that just requires a company, a calendar, and the reasonable human desire to feel like a holiday is worth celebrating. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The show described that one too, in the same episode where Homer ran for garbage commissioner, and it did it in 30 seconds. Section 7. The Manufactured Holiday as Corporate Revenue Extraction. The episode does not start with Homer. It starts in a boardroom. A man with a chart is standing at the head of a long table. Around the table sit executives in suits. The chart shows sales figures across the calendar year. The man points to different dates and reads out numbers. Christmas is enormous. Valentine's Day is strong. Thanksgiving is solid. Then he points to August. August is a flat line. August is nothing. August is a dead month where people are not buying things at the rate that makes the people in this boardroom happy. Someone at the table asks what they are going to do about August. The answer is Love Day. They are going to invent a holiday. They are going to give it a name and a feeling and a set of traditions that require purchasing things. And they are going to release it into the culture and let it run. And August will no longer be a flat line on their chart. The meeting ends. The executives leave. The episode moves on to the Simpson family celebrating Love Day with enormous enthusiasm, surrounded by packaging and gifts and the warm glow of a holiday that did not exist until a room full of businessmen decided it should. Lisa says, "Come on, Mom. The stores just invented this holiday to make money." Homer turns to her and says, "Lisa, do not ruin another Love Day." Another Love Day. This is not the first one. The family has already absorbed it. The holiday that was invented in a boardroom has already become real enough that Homer is defending it from criticism the way he would defend Christmas. Lisa is right about where it came from, and Homer does not dispute that. He just does not care. The holiday feels like a holiday now. That is enough. This opening is from Trash of the Titans, Season 9, Episode 22, which aired on April 26, 1998, the 200th episode of the series, the episode that wins the Emmy, the one everybody remembers as the Garbage Commissioner story. The Loveday boardroom scene is the first 2 minutes of that episode, and most people have completely forgotten it exists. That is partly because it works so well as a setup that it disappears into the story. The garbage that causes all of Homer's problems comes directly from Loveday. The mountain of packaging and unwanted gifts and holiday waste is what Homer has to take out to the curb. Missing the garbage truck is what starts the chain of events that leads to the election that buries the town. Every single thing that happens in the episode flows from that boardroom meeting. Loveday creates the garbage. The garbage starts the fight. The fight leads to the campaign. The campaign destroys Springfield. The people in that boardroom are never seen again. Writer Ian Maxtone Graham has confirmed that the Loveday concept was invented specifically as a way to generate the trash that the episode needed as its starting point. The writers needed Homer to have too much garbage. They needed a reason for the excess. They invented a fake holiday as the cause, and in doing so, they described something that was already beginning to happen in American retail culture, and has only become more systematic since. Here is what was happening in 1997 and 1998, when this episode was being written and produced. American retailers had spent decades using existing holidays to drive sales. Christmas, Valentine's Day, Easter, Mother's Day, Father's Day. The calendar was already fairly well covered in terms of manufactured purchasing occasions, but the gaps were visible to anyone looking at sales data the way the fictional executives in that boardroom were looking at it. Retail companies and their marketing partners were actively working on ways to fill those gaps. In 2010, American Express created Small Business Saturday. It is now treated as a genuine part of the holiday shopping calendar. It was invented by a credit card company to drive spending at small retailers, which in turn drives credit card transactions, which benefits American Express. The holiday has a name. It has a feeling. It has traditions. It was invented in a boardroom meeting not unlike the one that opened Trash of the Titans. In 2015, Amazon created Prime Day. It is now one of the largest single shopping events in the American retail calendar. It exists in July, which is a slow month for retail spending. Someone looked at a chart showing July was a flat line and invented a holiday to fix it. The holiday is not called a holiday. It is called a sale. But it functions as a holiday. It creates anticipation. It has a specific date. Families plan purchases around it. It generates a feeling of occasion that encourages spending beyond what people had originally intended. In the 2000s, Singles Day, a shopping event that originated in China, began to be marketed in the United States. It falls on November 11th, a date chosen because the number 11/11 looks like single people standing alone. Someone turned a number pattern into a purchasing occasion, and it became real. The show described the mechanism behind all of these things in 1998. Not the specific events, the mechanism, the boardroom, the chart, the flat line in August, the decision to manufacture a holiday to fill the gap, the ease with which ordinary people absorb manufactured traditions and defend them against anyone who points out where they came from. Homer's response to Lisa is the most important moment in those 2 minutes. He does not argue that Loveday is genuine. He does not claim it has historical roots or cultural meaning. He just tells her not to ruin it. The holiday is real to him because it feels real. The feeling is enough. The origin does not matter once the feeling has been established. This is the thing the executives in that boardroom understood, and the thing Lisa understood, and the thing Homer refused to understand, because understanding it would cost him something he did not want to give up. That cost, the cost of accepting that something you enjoy was designed to extract money from you, is real. It requires a kind of discomfort that most people would rather avoid. It is easier to celebrate Loveday than to think about why Loveday exists. Homer's reaction is not stupidity. It is a very human preference for the feeling over the mechanism that produced it. But the show is not on Homer's side here. The show started the episode in the boardroom. It showed you the chart and the flat line before it showed you the family celebrating. It made sure you saw the origin before you saw the tradition. It did this on purpose. It structured the episode so that the viewer would experience Love Day the way Lisa experiences it, with full knowledge of where it came from, and then watch Homer experience it the way the executives intended, as a genuine occasion that requires buying things. The trash is the argument. By the time Homer misses the garbage truck, the mountain of Love Day packaging piled up at the curb is enormous. The show makes the waste visible and physical and unavoidable. This is what a manufactured holiday produces, the episode is saying. Not warmth, not connection, packaging. Enormous amounts of packaging that has to go somewhere, that becomes someone's problem, that starts fights and buries towns, and requires a sanitation commissioner to manage. The Love Day packaging does not go away when the holiday ends. It goes into the garbage. The garbage goes into the mine shaft. The mine shaft erupts. The town is destroyed. The executives in the boardroom are not there for any of it. There is something else in those first 2 minutes that is easy to miss. The man presenting the chart is not talking about August as a community problem. He is not saying that people are unhappy in August, or that something is missing from their lives in August, or that August needs more meaning. He is saying that August is underperforming financially, and that this needs to be corrected. The holiday is not a response to any human need. It is a response to a data gap. The people who will celebrate it, who will buy things and wrap things and give things and feel the particular warmth that holidays produce, they are not the audience for the boardroom meeting. They are the solution to the problem the boardroom meeting identified. That distinction is what the episode is built around. The people in Springfield experience Love Day as a holiday. The people who created it experience the people in Springfield as a revenue opportunity. Both things are true at the same time. The holiday is real in the sense that it produces real feelings. It is manufactured in the sense that those feelings were engineered for someone else's profit. The show holds both of these things simultaneously without resolving them, which is exactly how it works in real life. Valentine's Day is the clearest example of a holiday that exists in this dual state. It has genuine emotional meaning for millions of people. It also has a documented history of being promoted by greeting card companies and florists and candy manufacturers in the early 20th century, specifically to drive purchasing during a slow period in the retail calendar. The two things coexist. The holiday is real and it was manufactured. Knowing that it was manufactured does not stop it from feeling real. Homer knows Love Day was invented by stores and still does not want anyone to ruin it. The National Retail Federation in the United States tracks holiday spending on every major purchasing occasion. Their data shows that spending on holidays like Valentine's Day, Mother's Day, and Father's Day has grown consistently for decades. In 2023, the NRF reported that Americans plan to spend an average of nearly $26 billion on Valentine's Day alone. The holiday that started as a greeting card company's response to a slow February has become one of the largest single spending events of the year. The Simpsons showed you the meeting where that decision gets made. It showed you the chart and the flat line and the man with the pointer and the suits around the table. It showed you this in 1998, and then it moved on to a story about garbage and elections. The garbage and the elections got the attention. The boardroom scene got forgotten. That is probably the most accurate thing about the whole episode, because in real life, the boardroom meetings that create the conditions for everything that follows are also the ones that nobody remembers. The holiday becomes real. The feeling becomes genuine. The packaging piles up. Someone has to deal with it. The people who created the situation are back in their building looking at next August's chart. And Homer is at the curb, too late for the truck, shouting at people he should not be shouting at, about to make decisions that will bury the town in exactly the garbage that was created in a meeting he was never invited to and never knew happened. But invented holidays and manufactured desire are one way America extracts something from ordinary people without their full understanding of what is happening. There is a version of this that is even more direct, one that does not bother with the feelings at all, one that skips the warmth and the traditions and the wrapping paper and gets straight to the part where a person is trying to pay their mortgage and suddenly realizes they are one bad month away from losing everything. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That story does not start in a boardroom. It starts in a kitchen. Homer has made a bad investment. The bill is due, and the only people he can ask for help are the two people in the world he least wants to ask. Section 8, the Pandemic Playbook. The sickness comes from a package. A factory worker in Osaka, Japan, has the flu. He is working on an assembly line, packing up orders of a product called the juice loosener, a juicer that people in Springfield have seen advertised on television and ordered in large numbers. The worker sneezes. He does not stop the line. The packages keep moving. They get sealed and shipped across the ocean and delivered to households all over Springfield, where people tear them open with excitement and let the germs out into their homes. Within days, nearly everyone in Springfield is sick. The episode is called Marge in Chains. It is the 21st episode of Season 4. It aired on May 6, 1993. It was written by Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein and directed by Jim Reardon. The illness in the episode is called the Osaka flu. It spreads fast. It hits the whole Simpson family. It hits Ned Flanders and his family. It hits most of the town. The only person who does not get sick is Marge, who is too busy taking care of everyone else to slow down long enough to catch it. This is the setup for an episode that is really about Marge being overwhelmed, getting arrested for accidentally shoplifting, and navigating an unfair legal system while her family falls apart without her. The flu is the mechanism that puts Marge in the impossible position the episode is built around. It is not the main point of the story. And yet, when 2020 arrived and COVID-19 spread across the world, this episode from 1993 resurfaced everywhere. News outlets ran pieces about it. Social media filled up with screenshots. People pointed to the Osaka flu and said the show had predicted the pandemic. Bill Oakley, one of the writers, pushed back on this clearly and publicly. He said in an interview with The Hollywood Reporter that he did not like the episode being used that way. He said, "There are very few cases where The Simpsons predicted something. It is mainly just coincidence because the episodes are so old that history repeats itself. Most of these episodes are based on things that happened in the 60s, 70s, or 80s that we knew about." That statement is important. Oakley is not saying the parallels are not there. He is saying they are there because pandemics follow patterns, and the writers understood those patterns because they had studied history. A respiratory illness originating in Asia and spreading through global trade routes is not a prediction. It is a description of how pandemics have worked throughout recorded history. The flu of 1918 killed tens of millions of people worldwide. SARS emerged in Asia in 2002. H1N1 spread globally in 2009. The writers of Marge in Chains were not prophets. They were people who knew how disease moves. But here is what makes the episode genuinely worth examining, and it is not the Osaka flu itself. It is everything that happens in Springfield after the Osaka flu arrives, the institutional response. That is where the show gets precise. Mayor Quimby, Springfield's perpetually corrupt and self-interested mayor, holds a press conference about the flu. He tells the townspeople that he has canceled his vacation to the Bahamas as a result of the crisis. He is standing at a podium looking serious and mayoral. Then the camera pulls back, exactly the way it pulled back in the Simpsons movie to reveal the NSA building, and it shows that Quimby is not at a podium at all. He is standing on a Bermuda beach in vacation clothes in front of a fake office backdrop. He canceled his vacation publicly. He did not cancel his vacation. This joke aired in 1993. It describes something that became one of the most repeated and documented political stories of 2020 and 2021. Multiple American governors and government officials who had issued stay-at-home orders and restrictions on public gatherings were photographed or reported to be traveling or attending events that violated the very rules they had put in place for everyone else. The most widely covered example was Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, who flew to Cancun with his family during the February 2021 Texas power crisis, when millions of his constituents were without heat or electricity during a historic winter storm. Cruz returned quickly after the trip became public. He has openly acknowledged being a Simpsons fan. The Wikipedia entry for Marge in Chains specifically notes the parallel between Quimby's fake backdrop vacation and the behavior of politicians during the pandemic, citing Cruz's trip to Cancun as a real-world example of the joke the episode made 27 years earlier. Then there is the crowd outside the hospital. Springfield's residents are sick and getting sicker, and they want a cure. They gather outside the medical clinic in a large, angry group. Dr. Hibbert comes out and tells them that the only real treatment for the Osaka flu is bed rest. There is nothing he can give them. Anything he provided would be a placebo, a fake treatment with no actual medical effect. A woman in the crowd hears the word placebo and asks desperately where they can get these placebos. The crowd immediately wants placebos. They have heard a word that sounds like medicine and they want it, even though the doctor just finished explaining that it is not medicine. The crowd then spots a white truck parked nearby. They assume the truck contains placebos. They rush it. They tip it over. The truck does not contain placebos. It contains a crate of killer bees, which escape and attack the crowd. Set aside the killer bees for a moment, because they are the joke on top of the real point. The real point is the placebo scene. A frightened population, desperate for something that will make them feel safe, hears a word associated with treatment and immediately demands it without understanding what it is. The doctor's explanation that a placebo has no medical effect does not register. The word sounds like help. They want it. When they believe they have found it, they rush toward it without checking whether what they are rushing toward is actually what they think it is. In 2020 and 2021, this exact pattern played out repeatedly in the United States around treatments for COVID-19. Hydroxychloroquine, a drug used to treat malaria and certain other conditions, was widely promoted on social media and by some public figures as a COVID treatment before clinical evidence supported that use. Demand for it surged. Prescriptions for it increased dramatically, even for people who did not have the conditions it was approved to treat. People rushed the equivalent of the white truck. The truck did not contain what they thought it contained. There were documented cases of people harming themselves by taking substances they believed were related to treatments they had heard about secondhand. Ivermectin, a medicine used to treat parasites in animals and certain infections in humans, went through a similar cycle. Online communities promoted it as a COVID treatment. Demand surged at veterinary supply stores because some people were obtaining and consuming animal-grade versions of the product. Poison control centers in multiple states reported sharp increases in calls related to ivermectin in 2021. People were rushing trucks that did not contain what they needed. Marge and Chains showed the mechanism in 1993. A scared crowd. A word that sounds like help. A rush towards something that is not the thing. The specific substances are different. The human behavior is identical. Then there is what the episode shows about Marge herself. Marge does not get the flu. She is the one holding everything together while everyone else is sick. She is doing the shopping, managing the household, taking care of 4 sick family members, handling every task that would normally be distributed among people who are currently too ill to function. She is doing all of this without anyone noticing how close to the edge she is getting. On a routine shopping trip to the Quickie Mart while picking up supplies for her sick family, including a bottle of bourbon that Grandpa has requested, Marge is so exhausted that she forgets to pay for the bourbon. She walks out without paying. Apu sees it happen. She is arrested and charged with shoplifting. What follows is a portrait of what happens to the person who keeps everything running when that person makes a single mistake while running on empty. She loses her case. She goes to jail. The family, who depended entirely on Marge without ever acknowledging how much they depended on her, immediately falls apart without her. Homer cannot cook. The children cannot manage their own routines. The whole household structure that Marge maintained through her own constant effort collapses within days of her removal from it. The pandemic parallel here is not about the illness. It is about the caregivers. In 2020 and 2021, American public health researchers and economists documented a specific and severe impact on the people, overwhelmingly women, who were doing the unpaid caregiving work that kept households functional during lockdowns. School closures meant children needed to be supervised and taught at home. Sick family members needed care. Elderly relatives needed support. The people doing this work were doing it without pay, without recognition, without relief, and without anyone publicly acknowledging how close to the breaking point they were operating. When those people made mistakes, when they snapped, when they missed something, when they needed help, the system that had relied on their invisible labor had no mechanism to support them in return. Marge's arrest is a cartoon version of this. She has been running on empty for the entire episode. She makes one mistake. The system, in the form of Apu's honesty and the legal process that follows, treats that mistake the same way it would treat the mistake of someone who had not been carrying everything alone for weeks. The context of her exhaustion is not a legal defense. She goes to jail anyway. The writers of Marge and Chains were not trying to make a point about caregivers and pandemic labor economics. They were telling a story about Marge being overwhelmed and what happens to a family when its invisible center is removed. But the story they told mapped onto something real enough that it became one of the most discussed Simpsons episodes during the COVID-19 period, not just for the flu, but for everything the flu set in motion. Bill Oakley's discomfort with the prediction framing is understandable and accurate. The episode did not predict COVID-19. It described human behavior during a health crisis, behavior that was consistent in 1957, in 1968, in 1993, and in 2020, because the behavior comes from fear, and the fear comes from uncertainty, and the uncertainty is a permanent feature of how human beings relate to illness. The Osaka flu is different from COVID-19 in its origins and its biology and its scale. The Springfield response to the Osaka flu is not different from the American response to COVID-19 in any way that matters. A politician on a beach pretending to be at his desk, a crowd rushing a truck that does not contain what they need, a person who is keeping everything together, making one mistake while running on nothing, and being treated as though the mistake happened in isolation from everything that caused it. The episode is 30 minutes long. It aired in 1993. Its writer does not want it called a prediction. He is right that it is not a prediction. It is something that requires a harder word. It is an observation about human nature so accurate and so complete that it described events that had not happened yet because those events were always going to happen. They were always going to happen because people under pressure behave the same way every time. The specific virus changes, the pattern does not. But while margin chains captured how ordinary people and their leaders behave when a crisis arrives, there is a different kind of crisis the show understood just as clearly, one that does not arrive suddenly with news coverage and hospital statistics, one that builds slowly, quietly, in kitchen tables and bank statements and mortgage payments that are almost but not quite manageable on a single income in a country that used to make that possible. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That crisis has been building in America for decades, and the show described it through the simplest possible lens. Homer Simpson made a bad investment. The bill came due, and what he had to do next tells you more about the American economy than most financial reports ever have. Section 9. The Shrinking Middle Class and Homer Simpson's Impossible Life. Homer Simpson owns a house. It is a real house, a 3-bedroom home at 742 Evergreen Terrace in Springfield. It has a yard. It has a garage. It has a kitchen big enough for a family of 5 to eat dinner together. It has a second floor with enough bedrooms that each child has their own space. It is not a mansion. It is not anything special. It is the kind of house that a family is supposed to be able to have. The kind of house that represents the basic American promise of a stable, decent life. Homer pays for this house on a single income. He works one job. He is a safety inspector at the Springfield Nuclear Power Plant. He did not go to college. He has a high school diploma from Springfield High School, which he obtained, as was revealed in a later episode, only after going back as an adult to complete a class he had failed. He is a union worker. He earns a wage that is never specified precisely in the show, but is clearly in the range of what a working-class American man might earn in a skilled trade position in the late 1980s and early 1990s. On that single income, Homer supports a wife who does not work outside the home, 3 children, a dog, and the house at 742 Evergreen Terrace. He drives a car. The family occasionally takes vacations. They eat dinner together most nights. They struggle sometimes, but the struggle is manageable. They are not in danger of losing everything. They are, by the standards the show establishes in its early seasons, a normal American family living a normal American life. When The Simpsons premiered on December 17, 1989, this was not meant to be aspirational. Matt Groening and the original creative team designed the Simpson family as a portrait of an average American household. Not wealthy, not struggling desperately, average. The house, the job, the one income, the 3 kids, all of it was chosen because it reflected what a typical working-class family's life looked like in America at the end of the 1980s. That is the part that has quietly become one of the most devastating things about the show. NPR's Planet Money ran a segment in June 2022 that addressed this directly. The segment asked a simple question. Could a family like The Simpsons actually exist today? Could a man with Homer's education, Homer's job, and Homer's single income support a household like the one on Evergreen Terrace in modern America? The answer, supported by economic data from the Pew Research Center and other sources, was no. Not even close. The Pew Research Center, which tracks the size and health of the American middle class, found that in 1990, the year after The Simpsons first aired, approximately 56% of American families were in the middle class. By 2022, that number had fallen to 50%. The middle class, the group of families whose income and circumstances the Simpson family was designed to represent, had shrunk by 6 6 percentage points over 3 decades. Millions of families had fallen out of the category that Homer's life was designed to sit comfortably within. But the percentage drop does not capture the full picture on its own. What changed was not just how many people were in the middle class. What changed was what the middle class could afford. In 1989, a union job at an industrial facility could, in many parts of the United States, support a mortgage on a 3-bedroom home on a single income. By the early 2000s, that was becoming rare. By the 2010s, it was nearly impossible in most American cities. By the 2020s, the idea of one working-class income covering a mortgage, a car, and 3 children in a house with a yard had moved from difficult to theoretical in most of the country. Homer's life did not become aspirational because the show made it glamorous. It became aspirational because the country changed around it while the show stayed the same. This is something the writers acknowledged. In a Season 8 episode called Homer's Enemy, Frank Grimes visits Homer's house for the first time and cannot understand how a man like Homer could own something like this. His disbelief is played as part of his character, his inability to accept the reality in front of him. But the writers were aware of what they were doing. The Quora discussions and fan analyses that accumulated over the years around this scene consistently make the same point. By Season 8, which aired in 1997, Homer's lifestyle was already beginning to feel like it required explanation. It no longer felt entirely normal. The gap between what Homer had and what a real person in his position could expect to have was already visible. Bill Oakley, the executive producer during Seasons 7 and 8, has spoken in interviews about the show's awareness of this tension. He has said that by the mid-1990s, the writers were conscious that Homer's circumstances were becoming harder to justify realistically. The show solved this by leaning further into cartoon logic, by letting Homer's life become more obviously absurd and episodic, by moving away from the grounded domestic realism of the early seasons. The shift that fans often describe as the show getting less serious happened partly because the reality the show had originally been depicting was becoming too uncomfortable to depict straight. The house is the clearest example, but it is not the only one. In the Season 6 episode, Homer vs. Patty and Selma, which aired on February 26, 1995, Homer makes an investment in pumpkin futures. He buys pumpkin contracts in October, believing they will peak in January. He does not sell them by Halloween. The pumpkin market collapses. Homer loses everything he invested. He cannot make his mortgage payment. He goes to the bank to ask for an extension and is told no. He goes to Moe to ask for a loan and is told that Moe would need to break his legs in advance since he has no collateral. Every door closes. His last option is Patty and Selma, Marge's sisters. They have recently received promotions at the DMV and have extra money. Homer hates Patty and Selma. They hate Homer. He goes to them anyway because there is nowhere else to go. They give him the money. In exchange, Homer has to do whatever they say and keep the loan secret from Marge. He becomes their servant. He rubs their feet. He runs their errands. He endures their cruelty because the alternative is losing his house and having to tell Marge he failed as a provider. When Marge eventually discovers the loan, Homer tells her the truth about why he hid it. He says he was ashamed. He says he felt like he had failed her as a husband and a provider. That word, provider. Homer does not just feel bad about losing money. He feels like his identity as a husband, his fundamental value to his family, is tied to his ability to keep the mortgage paid. His shame is not primarily about the pumpkins. It is about what the unpaid mortgage means about who he is as a man. He internalized a version of what it means to be a husband and a father in America that is built entirely around financial provision. When the financial provision fails, he does not just have a money problem. He has an identity crisis. This is something the show returns to repeatedly across its early seasons. Homer's relationship with his job is complex. He hates it. He falls asleep at the control panel. He is spectacularly bad at it. He has tried to quit or leave leave or change careers more times than can easily be counted. But he keeps going back. He keeps showing up to the nuclear plant because the job is the thing that pays for Evergreen Terrace. And Evergreen Terrace is the proof that he is doing what a husband and father is supposed to do. The show understands that this is a trap. The trap is not specific to Homer. It is the trap that the American promise of middle-class stability sets for working-class men. You work a job you may hate to pay for a life that proves you are succeeding at being a man. The job and the life are locked together. Losing either one means losing both. By the early 2000s, economists had a name for what was happening to families like the Simpson family in real America. They called it middle-class squeeze. Real wages for working-class Americans had been effectively flat since the early 1970s when adjusted for inflation. The costs of housing, healthcare, and education had risen significantly during the same period. The result was that families needed more income to maintain the same standard of living that a single income had supported a generation earlier. More women entered the workforce, not primarily because of changing cultural attitudes, though those attitudes did change, but because a single income was no longer sufficient to maintain the lifestyle that American culture had defined as normal and adequate. Homer and Marge's arrangement, with Homer working and Marge managing the household and children, was already becoming economically unusual by the time the show premiered. The show depicted it as average because it was trying to depict the recent past as the present, the version of American family life that was still in living memory, but was quietly becoming historical. The Harvard economists Elizabeth Warren and Amelia Warren Tyagi documented this shift in detail in their 2003 book, The Two-Income Trap. Their research showed that the addition of a second income to American households did not produce greater financial security for most families. It produced a bidding war for housing in good school districts that drove prices up, meaning that families needed both incomes just to afford what one income had previously covered. The safety net that a non-working spouse represented, the ability for that spouse to enter the workforce in a crisis, was eliminated by the fact that most families already needed both incomes at all times. Homer's family does not have this problem because Marge does not work outside the home, and the show does not age or inflation adjust its economics. 742 Evergreen Terrace cost the same in Season 30 that it cost in Season 1 because the show exists outside of real time. But the gap between Homer's world and the world that American families actually inhabit has been widening since the show first aired, and the widening is itself a document. When people watch early seasons of The Simpsons now, one of the things they feel, even if they cannot name it precisely, is a kind of grief. Not for the characters, for the conditions, for the world in which a man like Homer could accidentally fall into a life like his, for the version of America in which showing up to a union job was enough to keep the lights on and the mortgage paid and the family fed and together under one roof. That world did not disappear all at once. It shrank slowly, across decades, in ways that were hard to see clearly from inside them. The Pew Research Center tracked the shrinkage. The economists wrote about it. The political scientists analyzed it. The Simpsons showed it by staying still while everything around it moved. The house at 742 Evergreen Terrace has not changed. It looks the same in Season 36 that it looked in Season 1. But what it would cost a real Homer Simpson to own that house, and what a real Homer Simpson's wage would actually be, and how many jobs a real Marge would need to work to cover the difference, those numbers have changed enormously. The gap between the cartoon and the reality is now so large that the cartoon has become, without anyone intending it, a museum exhibit of something America used to be able to offer its working class and no longer can. Homer owns a house. He always will. The show will never take it from him. That is the one thing the cartoon can give him that the country stopped being able to give people like him a long time ago. But the shrinking middle class and the impossible mortgage are slow-moving disasters. They build over years and decades. They are hard to point to on a single day and say, this is when it happened. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The last thing the show got right about America is different. It is not slow. It happens in a single moment, in a booth, in a school, with a button and a screen. And the show got it right 4 years early, with the wrong names, in a Halloween episode. The fact that the names were wrong is the least interesting thing about it. The fact that the machine behaved exactly as the show said it would is the part that should have made everyone stop laughing. Section 10. The voting machine that betrays you. The scene is 11 seconds long. Homer walks into a voting booth. It is election day in Springfield. There are campaign banners everywhere. The mood is civic and busy. Homer steps behind the curtain, faces the voting machine, and reaches out to select Barack Obama. The machine registers his choice. Then it switches to John McCain. Homer tries again. It switches back to McCain. He tries a third time, McCain again. He tries repeatedly, increasingly panicked, and every single time, the machine takes his vote for Obama and gives it to McCain instead. The machine then reaches out a mechanical arm, grabs Homer by the collar, and pulls him inside itself. The episode moves on. The sequence is from the season 20 episode called Treehouse of Horror 19. It aired on November 2nd, 2008, which is the day before the actual 2008 presidential election between Barack Obama and John McCain. It was produced as a cold open before the regular Treehouse of Horror anthology segments. The joke is quick, absurd, and meant to land as a funny piece of Election Day topical humor before the show gets into its Halloween stories. It is also a description of something that happened in real life 4 years later. In October 2012, during the presidential election between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney, a voter in Centerville, Pennsylvania filmed themselves using a touchscreen voting machine at their polling location. The video showed the voter selecting Barack Obama on the screen. The machine switched the selection to Mitt Romney. The voter tried again. The machine switched again. The video was posted online and spread rapidly. MSNBC reported on it. The incident was investigated by election officials in Pennsylvania. The explanation given was that the machine's touchscreen was not properly calibrated, causing it to register touches in slightly the wrong location, which meant a tap on Obama's name was being read as a tap on Romney's name. The Simpsons episode got the year wrong by one election cycle. It got the candidate names wrong because the real incident involved different candidates, but it got the specific failure mode of the machine exactly right. A voter selecting one candidate, the machine registering a different one, the voter trying repeatedly and getting the same wrong result. That sequence of events, which the show played as a quick absurdist joke in 2008, was documented on video in a real American polling location in 2012. Now here is the thing that needs to be said carefully and accurately about what this means and what it does not mean. The Simpsons did not predict voting machine fraud. The Pennsylvania incident in 2012 was investigated and attributed to a calibration problem with the touchscreen. It was a technical malfunction. Election officials addressed it. There is no verified evidence that it was intentional. The show's version, where the machine grabs Homer and pulls him inside, is obviously cartoon exaggeration. The real version was a malfunctioning screen in a single polling location that was reported, investigated, and corrected. What the show predicted was not a conspiracy. It predicted a specific technical failure that was plausible enough to be worth making a joke about in 2008 and real enough to be documented on video in 2012. It predicted that American voting technology was fragile enough that a voter could try to record one choice and have the machine record a different one. That prediction was correct. This matters because the question of whether American voting machines work reliably is not a new question, and it is not a partisan one. It is a question that election security researchers, computer scientists, and government auditors have been raising for decades. Touchscreen voting machines, the kind used in many American counties since the early 2000s, were introduced with limited independent security testing. Researchers at universities and security conferences demonstrated repeatedly in the years after their introduction that these machines had vulnerabilities. The machines were used in millions of American elections before many states began moving back toward paper ballots as a more reliable and auditable option. The Simpsons episode aired in 2008, right in the middle of the period when these concerns were most active among election security researchers. The joke was not made in ignorance. The writers of the show were aware that the reliability of electronic voting machines was a genuine and ongoing concern in American democracy. They made a joke about it that was grounded in a real anxiety that real experts were expressing through real research at the time. 4 years later, a voter in Pennsylvania filmed it happening. But there is something else in that 11-second scene that almost nobody talks about. Something that is easy to miss because the joke moves so fast and the machine eating Homer is so absurd that it takes over the whole memory of the scene. Nobody helps him. Homer is standing in a voting booth, visibly struggling with a machine that is not recording his vote correctly. He tries multiple times. The machine malfunctions visibly and repeatedly, and then it takes him, and the scene cuts, and the episode continues. And nobody in the polling location notices or responds or investigates what just happened to the man in the booth. The polling location keeps running. Other voters presumably keep voting. The election presumably continues. Homer's vote is gone. His attempt to participate in the democratic process has been eaten by the machine he was supposed to use to participate, and the world around him carries on as though nothing unusual occurred. This detail is not an accident. The writers did not accidentally leave out the part where poll workers rushed to help or officials shut down the malfunctioning machine. They left it out because the joke is not just about the machine failing. The joke is about the failure going unaddressed. The joke is about the specific American experience of trying to use a system that does not work and finding that the system's non-working status is not anyone's particular emergency. People who have tried to report voting machine issues at real polling locations have described experiences that rhyme with this. The machines malfunction. Poll workers try to help. Solutions are sometimes available and sometimes not. Provisional ballots are offered, which are paper ballots that are counted separately and are sometimes not counted at all, depending on the circumstances. The voter who started the day intending to cast a vote can end the day uncertain about whether their vote was recorded correctly or recorded at all. The system does not always have a clear mechanism for the voter to verify what happened. The Simpsons showed this in 11 seconds. A man walks in to vote, the machine takes his vote away, nobody fixes it, and the world moves on. There is a broader argument the show was making through this scene about the relationship between American citizens and the systems they are supposed to use to exercise their rights. The voting machine is just one version of a pattern the show returns to across its entire run. The systems that are supposed to serve ordinary people in Springfield, the government, the courts, the schools, the healthcare system, the workplace, routinely fail to do what they are supposed to do. And the failure is rarely anyone's specific fault, and rarely anyone's specific responsibility to fix. Mayor Quimby's government is corrupt, but also just incompetent. The Springfield police, led by Chief Wiggum, are not evil. They are just bad at their job in ways that nobody holds them accountable for. The school system is underfunded, and the teachers are mostly defeated. The nuclear plant is dangerous, and the safety inspector is Homer. None of these are presented as villains running deliberate schemes. They are presented as systems that have stopped working and keep going anyway, because stopping would require someone to care enough to stop them. The voting machine that eats Homer is the clearest image the show ever produced of this broader argument. The machine is not malevolent. It is broken. The election continues around it. Homer's vote disappears into it. Nothing changes. The ballot count presumably goes forward without whatever Homer was trying to add to it. Democracy, in this 11-second scene, is a system that a person can try sincerely to participate in and be physically removed from, and the system will process this as normal and keep running. That is a dark thing to put in a Halloween episode cold open the day before a presidential election. The show did it anyway. Now here is the factual record of where touchscreen voting machines in America have gone since 2008. In the years following the 2012 Pennsylvania incident, multiple states conducted reviews of their electronic voting equipment. Security researchers at conferences including DEF CON, an annual gathering of computer security professionals, conducted tests on voting machines that were available for purchase, and demonstrated significant vulnerabilities in several models. These demonstrations were widely reported. States including Pennsylvania, Georgia, and others undertook processes to replace touchscreen machines with systems that produce a paper record that voters can verify before submitting their ballot. The move toward paper-backed voting systems has been driven specifically by the recognition that touchscreen machines without a paper trail cannot be audited in a way that gives voters and officials confidence that the results are accurate. These changes did not happen because The Simpsons made a joke in 2008. They happened because the concerns that joke was based on were real, and were eventually taken seriously enough to drive policy changes in multiple states. The show was pointing at something that researchers and security experts were pointing at the same time, and the direction they were all pointing in turned out to be correct. The episode holds one more detail worth noting. It aired on November 2nd, 2008. The actual 2008 presidential election was on November 4th, 2008. The show put a voting machine joke on television 48 hours before one of the most significant elections in American history. The timing was deliberate. The writers wanted it to land on election eve. They wanted it to be the thing viewers were thinking about when they went to the polls the next day. Whether anyone thought about it while voting is not recorded anywhere. What is recorded is that 4 years later, in Pennsylvania, a voter's touchscreen switched their Obama selection to Romney, and they had the presence of mind to take out their phone and film it. And the video spread everywhere. And MSNBC reported on it, and officials investigated it, and the explanation given was a calibration error. And the show had described exactly that scenario in 11 seconds of cartoon comedy in 2008. The machine got the wrong names. It got the right problem. And that, in the end, is the most accurate description of what The Simpsons has been doing for over 35 years. It gets the names wrong because the names are not the point. Springfield is not a real city. Homer is not a real man. Blinky, the three-eyed fish, is not a real fish. Frank Grimes did not really die. The voting machine did not really eat anyone. But the three-eyed fish is in the river. The Frank Grimes resentment is in the voting booth. The Loveday packaging is in the garbage. The NSA building is real. The mortgage is underwater. The casino is open. The populist candidate is in office. The pandemic played out the way the episode described. The billionaire hired the spin doctor. The middle class shrank while Homer's house stayed exactly the same size. The names were wrong. Everything else was a document. Which brings this essay to the place it has been building toward since the first section. Because 10 specific moments of accuracy, as precise and as well-sourced as they are, do not fully explain what the show actually did over 35 years. The predictions, the warnings, the accurate portraits of broken systems and broken promises, they are not the whole story. They are evidence for something larger. Something about what kind of show The Simpsons actually is, and what it was doing while America was watching it, and what it means that a cartoon understood the country better than most of the institutions that were supposed to be paying attention. That is the conclusion, and it requires starting not with an episode, but with a question. If the show was right about all of this, and the evidence says it was, then what exactly was it right about? Was it right about specific events? Or was it right about something underneath the events? Something about the shape of the country? Something that made all of these specific moments inevitable once you understood the forces producing them? The answer changes everything about how you watch the show. And it starts with the simplest possible observation about Springfield, one that has been sitting in plain sight since December 17th, 1989, waiting for someone to say it clearly. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.